Hey, good morning, friends. It's me, Zev, Director of Cooperate WNC, and I'm sitting here this morning with my friend Simon Mont, and we want to talk about some offerings that Simon has that we think could be useful to folks in our network. And so we just wanted to have a little conversation to share it with you all this way so you can get a feel for what we're up to. And yeah, I wanted to hand it over to Simon to introduce yourself.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I'm Simon. Right now I live in Durham, but in not a couple weeks I'll be moving back to Santa Fe where I'm going to take stewardship over this 19-acre woodland mountain property. So I'll be learning all about fire safety, learning all about a lot of things there. Um, yeah, so my background is kind of my life is about the relationship between spirituality and justice, and I've explored that as a school teacher, a public defender, and a movement lawyer, and then kind of through movement lawyering, started to see this puzzle that a lot of us have, like as we build organizations, as we do projects, how do we actually work together to create the world that we want to see? I've been exploring that with a whole number of different groups ranging from like kind of direct action groups to large national decentralized networks to direct service providing nonprofits. So like, everything from like an abortion fund to how do you do a rally to how do you do, and worked with a number of different land projects. So land trusts, a couple land trusts that are like focused on community development and accessible housing, some groups that are focused on ethical land transitions and rematriation, um, and currently actually working with a BIPOC-led land justice network that's actually participating in some of these courses that we're going to be talking
Is that in
about.
Durham?
No, that's on the East Coast.
Oh, East Coast. Got it.
Yeah, and I haven't talked to them about how much to share
Gotcha.
publicly about things. So
Yeah. Mhm. Get it. You just get us all curious, and I
yeah, just
sounds like great
curious.
work.
Yeah, hopefully that was my spiel. Oh yeah, and then, personally, I've been a part of collective living, and like kind of lived from the inside of like, it was in an urban environment, but lived from the inside of, oh my gosh, we're here, we want to live together, be together for a purpose. How do we actually pull that off?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've been
Well,
doing that for a while.
awesome. Yeah, and we first met when I took this really incredible training that you were one of the trainers for the Collaborate to Collaborate training several years ago. That's all about kind of more horizontal governance and relational organizing for nonprofits and community orgs. And then Simon, you were really supportive for Cooperate WNC right after the storm when we were getting together fiscal sponsorship agreements and trying to create a really attuned way to support unincorporated mutual aid groups in Western North Carolina in receiving tax deductible funds. And Simon helped kind of coach us through creating some agreements that were really based on trust and relationship to start setting fiscal sponsorships up, which we're now doing. So I really appreciate your support and generosity in
I'm
volunteering.
glad that it was supportive.
Oh yeah,
I felt like I was just like, wow, how can I help? Is this help?
it was really helpful. You provided those draft documents and gave us feedback,
Good.
and just the energy of the exchange of like how we can create the right balance of structure and adaptability through those agreements. Yeah, so that kind of gave me some created some trust for me with you, and that lunch that we had to in Durham back in the winter, getting to talk about conflict and how organizations work and different styles of organizing. And so when you brought this to me about this unshakable organizations training that you've put together, I was like, listening. And so, yeah, I wanted to invite you to share some about that training, please.
Yeah. So anytime we get together as a group of people to try to do a thing, we're faced with this puzzle of like, well, how do we actually organize ourselves to do that thing? And there's a lot of different people and different frameworks and different tools that we can bring to bear on that question.
Mhm.
There's a particular thing that we all need to be able to do, though, which is given all those tools, you got your mocha chart, and you've got your holacracy and your sociocracy, and you've got your decision making framework, and you've got your culture building relationship thing, and you got your trust building, and you got your communications, you got all these things. You're trying to
Conflict, right?
do conflict, all these things.
Mm.
Cool. So how do you kind of see the forest through the trees of it and understand, well, what does it mean to build an organization, a group that can sustain their connection and direction towards some type of creation and purpose that they want? How do you do that thing in a holistic way? And that's the real space that Unshakable Organization steps into, which is like, cool, we're going to help you see how to really build a whole organizational project, give you a bunch of tools for all the different component parts, help you see how your own component parts fit together, and then help you be able to build that. And then particularly, right, the name Unshakable Organizations is really thinking about the context that we're in right now. There's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
So the level of like resilience that we need is substantial.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Well, so I have a. Can I ask a question about
Yeah,
this?
let's do it. Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. I mean, we have in Cooperate WNC's network. There are some nonprofits and more formalized institutions in our network and stuff, but mostly folks in our network are farmers, collective land projects, unincorporated mutual aid groups, and stuff like that. Like, would this work apply, and how would you describe it applying to these different kind of modalities?
Yeah, totally. It totally applies. It applies to everything, over
Yeah,
everything. And we've
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of designed it as a meeting space for people who really are just thinking about how do we work together to solve these gnarly problems.
Hmm.
And the question of am I incorporated? Am I, what's my legal form is we're not really going to talk about that. It
Ah,
works, right? We can go there if we need to.
right.
Like let's take like all right, let's take like a mutual aid project, for example. Okay. You get together, you're faced with some questions immediately. Like, what are we doing here? Mutual aid for who and why are we doing this? And what am I trying to achieve? And then, okay, how do we make the decision about that? Okay, resources are coming in. How do we delegate the labor to go out and get the resources?
Hmm.
Once it's here, how do we make a decision about where the resources go? How is that how are those things tied to our sense of deeper purpose and why we're doing mutual aid, and how is our sense of why we're doing mutual aid tied to our love and connection with people as well as our awareness of what's happening politically, right? Those are a lot of questions you write up against. None of them are your legal form.
Right.
Right? And
Interrelated with the legal form in some ways, but they're not the legal form.
yeah, then there's a
Right.
question of, okay, given how you answer all those questions,
Yeah.
what's the best way to interface with the financial system or the legal system?
Right.
But there's these primary questions beforehand, and then I could do riff the same thing for a community land project, right? Who comes in? What are you producing? Are you producing? Why are you producing? When, how are you sharing space and how are you sharing resources? There's all these things, and I think a lot of people will talk about that as like governance. How do
Right.
we do governance? Cool. Governance is a great word. It makes a lot of sense to some people and it makes no sense to other people.
Hmm.
So basically, we meet that question and we say, like, look, no matter what your project is, you got to learn how to do four things together. And here comes like our framework. Okay. So you got to learn four things together. You got to learn how to see together, be together, work together, and grow together.
Hmm.
You got to learn how to see together. And see means like understand your context, understand the root causes of what's creating your context, and understand what your purpose is given that.
Hmm.
Right. So you like, cooperate WNC, right? Some of your context is in your name. There is a geographical location that centers what you are doing.
Yeah.
Right. Look at you're wearing things that are signaling to me your context, right? Make America Native again. You're understanding part of your project in the terms of the colonial history that we're inside of. And that relates to your understanding of causality. You're like, you probably have a causal analysis It's like, yo, colonization is one of the things at the root of kind of the American system and violence to the earth. And
Yeah.
that probably gives you a sense of purpose, right? Probably when you think about what you're doing, some of the work you're doing is, does this decolonize? How
Yeah.
am I decolonized? Beautiful, right? And if people are in that way of seeing with you, great. Like you're going to be able to do things. Some people are going to see differently
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to challenge that. But how do you bridge these different ways of seeing to create a way of seeing together? Great. That's one of the things we have to learn how to do.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the space of like, do we agree on politics? Do we agree on all? Cool. Got to figure that out
Yeah.
together. And then we got to learn how to be. Right. So we're humans, thoughts, feelings,
Mm.
emotions, souls, traumas, personal histories, lots of stuff going on. Right. I have a whole internal world. The way I navigate my internal world is going to shape how I collaborate with you.
Yeah.
Right. So we need some shared way of negotiating how we're each navigating our internal worlds.
Yeah.
Right. This is the language of, triggers or traumas or taking accountability and I statements, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then interpersonally, right, we need to, the quality of our relationship as two people impacts our collaboration, what we create.
Yeah.
Cool. We need to learn how to tend to that and set good expectations. And if we show up and you expect me to be my best friend and you expect me to be your best friend and I expect you to do the to-do list with as least drama as possible.
That's different.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Neither of us might be wrong, but okay.
Wait, are you
Then
saying you're not my best friend? No, just kidding.
we're friends. I hope I pray you have people closer in than me. Maybe I'll get there. I'm open to getting there with
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for your honesty. Yeah.
Maybe fun to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then and then we're be together in culture. And then when we work together, we have to create structures. So this is where people think about governance, right? We need to create
Yeah.
roles. If you're in a kind of, you can think about job descriptions for kind of a nonprofit environment. But even if you're not, how do I describe what labor you do and what labor I do, what you're responsible for and what I'm responsible for, and
Yeah.
how those things relate and how that relates to how we decide things? We got to figure that out. Then we got to figure out like our practices and processes. How do we respond to a conflict? How do we respond to a need to make a decision? How do we respond to a tricky financial situation? Like how do we facilitate a meeting? How do we set agendas? All this stuff that we got to figure out. And then our policies, like what are formal agreements and boundaries we create. So we got C, we got B, we got work. And now let's talk about growing together, because now, no matter how you do that, no matter how you see B and work, at some point you'll confront the fact that it's not going to meet the challenge in front of you.
Mm.
At some point, you realize now reality is saying the way you see being work together needs to change in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah.
And when that happens, what do you do? So how do you receive the call to change and respond to it? And what calls to change do you fundamentally respond to? Right? There's a call to change that comes from a space of vision. There's one that comes from a space of fear. There's one that comes from a space of financial need. There's one that comes from a space of ego and power. How do you listen
Yeah.
and start evolving together? So CB work, grow together. And you see what I did? I kind of like painted this picture and then these subcategories of what it is. And the course is basically going into all of that. So how do all of these things work? Then from Harmonize, we said, here's our tools for some of these things.
Nice.
But right, we're going to teach you how we hold context.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we're going to talk about how the fact that you, Zev,
Mm-hmm.
are clearly holding a context about the history of colonization, bringing that above the level of consciousness so we can talk about it. We
Right.
can talk about how you hold that in relationship with people who might not hold it in exactly the same way, and how our contexts influence what we create.
Yeah.
Beautiful, just to create more choicefulness.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that overview. And it reminds me, the last thing you just said reminds me of what you were telling me before we started recording about how there's an option for groups to kind of participate in the teaching lectures, and then there's another option for them to come and get more of like a cohort coaching. Would you be willing to talk about the whole format and the pricing structure and everything like that so people can understand what the options are there?
Yeah, totally. So there's three basic things that we're doing. The first one is we're doing lectures. They're an hour and a half. They're participatory. We're not just going to talk at you, but it's mostly like receiving content and receiving tools. There's 13 of those for the Unshakable Organizations course, and we're asking people to pay $999 for those.
Gotcha.
Then there's discussion groups, and those are open to any participant that shows up. And there's two of them for each lecture. There's two different times that are available, and you show up and you have whatever conversation is the conversation to be had amongst that group, right? So if one person shows up, you're going to end up with a great one-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
If 50 people show up, it might be a conversation that's not the best service to you. Like, we're going to do our best to kind of have the right conversation.
Yeah.
And that's an extra $500 for all of them put together.
Gotcha.
And then we're also building cohorts. So one of the things we're doing is taking existing groups that have relationships with one another,
Mm-hmm.
and then they do the lecture, and then they have their own cohort space of 8 to 12 folks, and then we're facilitating them as a cohort to have their conversation, which is about how to implement this in their contexts, and also how to build relationships across those organizations to create new possibilities. And that the pricing's flexible on, and it like very much sliding scale. If folks are interested, just
So
hit us up.
the price, just to get this clear, the pricing that you just said, the 999 and 500 is for an individual human. And then
Yeah.
if a group wants to get a cohort in there, they just should email you and kind of have a conversation about that.
Yeah. And generally the thing with the pricing, like we talked about before, is like
Yeah.
we are Harmonize is a cooperative. We're not a nonprofit. We need to pay our bills
Yeah.
through charging people stuff. That's just it. So we're really hoping that people can work with us and pay that
Yeah.
because we got bills to pay and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at that price and you're like, oh, I really want to do this, but that price is prohibitive, you just email us and have a conversation. And the spirit is really just like, if you're clear enough inside yourself that you want to take the course, and you're clear enough inside yourself that it's the price that's prohibitive, and you're clear enough to let us know and have a conversation, we will show up to the conversation and make it work.
Yeah.
And we want you to take that gut check of like, is it just that I just really don't want to pay this?
Right.
If so, like, we
Yeah.
I don't want to pay rent either.
Right. I mean, I'd rather go on a surfing vacation to Costa Rica than pay you for the class. Is that okay?
Like, then go on the surfing vacation. All blessings on the surfing vacation. But yeah. So we're just trying to be really like in relationship around it and make
Yeah.
it work.
Really appreciate that.
Like
Appreciate your
at the end of the
transparency
day,
about that.
me and my business partner Tamola, right? We're movement builders, right? That's why we're here. We're trying
Yeah.
to do that. We're just trying to figure out the financial system that works inside of capitalism. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I want to underline, you said Harmonize is a worker co-op.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we like supporting those. Great. Well, I know we have to finish up in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to just say a last thing about conflict, because you're also offering something on conflict, and people in our network are probably tuned into the fact we've been working on conflict offerings for a few years in Cooperate WNC after getting a bunch of input that people are like, conflict is the single biggest barrier to the success of our cooperative projects, even more than accessing finances.
Tell me
Uh,
about it.
and um, and so Simon and I have begun a conversation on this. We're kind of like you were referencing, the integration of all of these different disparate elements into a coherent approach can be a confusing thing. And so Simon and I were transparent when you contacted me saying we're doing contact offering. I was like, cool. Can we have some conversations to see how it merges so we don't confuse everyone in our network by offering like multiple things on conflict, and then people are like, how do we approach this because we've got a pile of tools. So I want to like surface that at least, and acknowledge you're offering some stuff around conflict. We're having some conversations about what the relationship of the two systems are to each other. And do you want to speak briefly to it?
Yeah, so we have our like conflict, we have a conflict resilience training that we're doing, and I'm really curious about how those things bridge. And then we talk
Yeah.
about the personal, interpersonal, organizational, systemic layers of conflict and like
Yeah.
how to respond to it. But actually, hearing you say this right now makes me aware of another bridge that I think actually is juicier, which
Okay.
is like if two people are having a conflict inside a cooperative,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes that conflict is about the two of them are figuring out how to communicate and get along,
Right.
right? Sometimes they're having a conflict about how do we solve a problem together?
Mhm.
How do we create? What is the decision making system that we
Yeah.
create?
Yeah.
Right? What is the way we do our strategy?
Yeah.
What is the way we share our labor? Right?
Yeah.
How do we do these? Like there, it's a substantive conflict.
That's more what we're pointing to with conflict transformation is seeing how conflicts display and reveal underlying power dynamic and trauma histories and positionality and all that. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that one of the places where the unshakable organizations course actually might step in is right. You might sit there, you might have this conflict conversation. Me and you might talk. We
Yeah.
might get underneath it and realize, oh, like I respect you, you respect me, and ultimately we don't know how we want to like make decisions together.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
this course basically comes in, it's like, cool.
Right.
Here is a bunch of ways you can solve that because sometimes we're in those conflicts because we don't yet have the technical solutions and the languages to create those solutions. And I think
Yeah.
that could be really helpful for where
Mm.
folks are at for y'all right now.
Yeah.
And in the future, our conflict course really, it sounds like our practice is as deep as your practice.
Yeah.
Our course is a little bit more, how do you like get super efficient inside of the context of a collaboration where you don't know that everyone's going to go to the bottom of the well with you, right?
Mm.
You're inside of a nonprofit office. Like we're not going
Okay.
to the bottom of the well.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
we just need to get enough resilience so that we can figure it out. And some people are going to, we need to know the bottom of the well is there.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I'm kind of understanding maybe some other relationships.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I know you got to go in a sec, but that's a good segue because I think yeah, we're inviting groups to do depth conflict systems creation for their groups where everyone is invested at a deep emotional and relational level. And I'm hearing you say you're trying to create workable conflict systems for contexts where people don't necessarily have that depth with everyone in the group. So maybe that's a distinction that we can work with and
Yeah, well, I think it'll be fun.
yeah.
Maybe later when we like focus on the conflict, and we can record ourselves talking about this, and that could be an interesting thing.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for your time, Simon. Thanks for doing this beautiful
Yeah,
work and for your
thanks,
care and
Zev.
heartfulness. And
Yeah, thanks for chatting with me, and thanks everybody for taking the time to like listen and consider. And yeah, we're here for the courses, and then we're also here just trying to for the question of how people work together. So if what I'm kind of saying feels like it's a match for something that you might need, you can just reach out and we'll figure out how to
perfect.
go together.
And we'll put the info in the newsletter and social post stuff. But will you just say the website and your email address too to make it easy for
Sure.
folks?
www.harmonize.work, harmonizing work. And then my email address is just my name at Harmonize, Simon, Simon at harmonize.work.
Dot work. Nice.
Work.
All right. Thanks a lot, Simon.
All right. Thanks, though.